Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and spring has definitely sprung. So much growth around the place, so much new growth, so much to manage, so much to look after, but it's very exciting. It's a great time of the year. I personally think it's one of my favourite. I say that every season, I know, but this is truly one of the best. In this episode of the podcast, I'm going to talk about a few little issues. Like, one is spiders. You may have noticed on your trees a hell of a lot of cobwebs. Sometimes there's areas for concern, sometimes there's not. So I just want to have a chat about those. And I also want to talk about another thing which is disturbing, I suppose, for me. We all set expectations. We set plans. We aim for targets. We want the best. And with a lot of the images that I'm seeing these days, a lot of stuff coming through on social media, a lot of it's not real. And I get messages from people saying, how do I get my tree to look like this? Or what do I have to do to make my get structure like that? Or how do I get my leaves to look like that? What variety is it? And I think it's just an area for concern. So I just want to have a brief yak, I suppose, about AI and where I think it's placed for us in the bonsai world. And it should be an interesting chat. Anyway, let's get into it. Spiders are a fantastic insect, and they help in so many ways that I have no qualms with spiders whatsoever. So please don't take this as an attack on spiders, because it's definitely not. It's more that when I see spiders around the yard in my bonsai, it means that I need to be on top of where I'm at with my trees, because they can cause issues. They definitely can. They're not going to eat your plants. You know, I get a lot of messages and concerns about spider webs. Sometimes it's spider mites. They're very fine webbing on your trees. You often see it on pines or junipers, that sort of thing, especially with a bit of morning dew hanging around. You'll see very fine webbing. Then that's spider mites, and that's something which needs to be treated. But I'm not talking about spider mites. I want to talk about physical spiders. Now it seems to be that every morning I walk out, I get a face full of cobwebs walking between the trees, and when I get the morning sunlight looking at the right direction, I can see the webbing between different trees in my yard. Does it worry me? No, it doesn't. It definitely doesn't. But it makes me look for where there could potentially be a problem with the spiders and with my trees. And one of the big things you've got to look for is density of the foliage mass. So for me at this stage, normally it's things like my pines or my junipers, that sort of thing, or cedars especially, I find there's an issue with as well. Deciduous, they haven't got to the point where they're quite dense. You know, they're just popping out their buds and their leaf structures just coming out, so it's not really a problem. But when it comes to those other varieties and my natives, my Australian natives, where there's already foliage mass there, when I see spiders around the yard, my biggest concern is that they're going to clump foliage together, make a little nest, which is fine. That's the way they roll. But when they clump that all together, that area that gets pulled in together gets even more restricted. And I find that you're going to get a lot of dieback in that area. So while the spiders aren't causing damage to my foliage by eating it, obviously, because that's not what they do definitely cause damage on trees that are too dense and maybe where they start pulling that foliage mass in together. Cedars are notorious for it. I find caterpillars and cedars are probably the two main things. Caterpillars on cedars and spiders on cedars are the two main things that I try and look to eliminate, because they bunch things together. The caterpillars make a hell of a mess and start eating the needles and chewing them back, but they'll make these little nests where they pull everything in nice and tight, and all of a sudden when you start separating it, you'll find that the needles are all dry and things start to fall off, or it's brown on the interior, or it just generally looks a lot weaker. So at this really, really early part of spring, where things are just starting to happen and you start to see those spider webs, which is really common, then have a look through the trees and you'll have to take action. I try and have it where I'll move the spiders onto another area, but there's literally thousands of these things around the yard. So I will spray around the yard and try and look at moving things on, but I'll more often than not, I'll try and thin out a tree that maybe I've missed. Maybe it's got a bit too thick. Maybe it's grown a bit too dense for this time of the year. We're really early, so it shouldn't be dense yet. It should be nice and light and airy, and sunlight should be getting in there, and airflow should be happening. So when I find that that's not happening, and the spiders are getting in there and bunching things, it's a real indicator to me that maybe I haven't done what I should have done, and it might be time to bring it into the workshop and give it a bit of a lighten up and a bit of an opening prune, because when they're light and airy like that, I definitely don't find that spiders cause a problem. It's only when they get into those super dense ones that I find that it's going to cause dieback. So I'm not saying get rid of spiders in the yard, because spiders help with so many other pests around the yard. They're a great helper for us with our bonsai. It's only when they start to clump that foliage together and make their nest that I find that they can cause a bit of an issue. So we've got to live with them. We should encourage them, but just be careful that they're not going to start causing damage, especially around the apex of the tree. I find that that's the spot that they love. That's obviously the densest. It's the one that's going to grow the fastest. It's where they've got the most shelter and protection, because generally that dome, the weather doesn't get in there and affect it quite as much. So just be mindful that they're our friends, but they can cause an issue with the trees as well. All right, so let's talk about AI. I know on a much earlier episode of the podcast, I did talk about AI, and to be honest, in so many forms, I know there's so much potential for good, but in so many ways, I find that AI is just so dangerous. And I'm only talking from a bonsai perspective at the moment. And I know that it's a source that can, you put in something like, tell me how to grow a grapefruit as a bonsai. And I'm sure that it'll spit back an answer to you, which sounds feasible, sounds realistic. It's built with, I suppose most times, an intention to do good or to help or to provide a source that's something that we can all use. But so far as bonsai is concerned, again, I'm not going to delve outside that. There's too much to talk about with it. But in regard to bonsai, what I've seen of it and what it can do is pretty detrimental. It's something which provides a falseness. It's like seeing doctored photos of people in magazines or tabloids or something like that. That's no good. We've got to keep things realistic. And my approach with it is that I always think about somebody who's enthusiastic, who's early in their bonsai journey, who really wants to get the most out of bonsai and really wants to achieve things, and they're chafing at the bit. I think about what I was like so many years ago when I got under my skin like a worm and just dug away, and every second of every day was just trees, bonsai. Like, how do I get this thing? How do I get this to the next level? And how do I push it as hard as I possibly can? And what's the next step? What's next? Real young man in a hurry sort of rubbish. And I look at it now, and you have a quick scroll through Facebook, and because you're members of certain pages or groups or whatever else, Facebook does this algorithm where, or one of the social medias, not just targeting Facebook, but any of them, they sort of start presenting anything to do with bonsai. And there's so many different pages around the world, and a lot of the photos that come up are AI generated, because I look at them and think that's not realistic. Like it's a very pretty tree. It looks great. It's not realistic, and you're never going to achieve that in your life ever. Never ever. So they annoy me, and I try and say I don't want to see this rubbish anymore. Keep it away from me. But I think it's worth talking about the influx of AI and what anyone listening to the podcast or anyone that's got that enthusiasm for bonsai, and what I suppose my best advice can be for you if you do start to get confused and if you do start to be drawn down a rabbit hole that's not realistic. I think that the best advice I can give you is you've got to trust the source. A lot of the stuff that I see comes with people I've never seen or never heard of, and they're in places around the world that I've never been to. So while it's possible that they could be realistic, there's a really high likelihood that they're not, that they're completely false and they're made up, and it's just rubbish. So always trust the source. And I think that's where you get the opportunity to reach out and see who you connect with. So your feed, your source of images, your source of inspiration, I suppose, comes to you from where you want it to come, as opposed to a program shoving rubbish at you that's going to make you feel, I suppose, a little disheartened. Like I said, I think it's done with best intention to make you think, wow, look at that, it's beautiful, that's great. But I think that if you're looking at those sort of images and then you go to your yard and you look at your trees, then it might sort of create a bit of a dissatisfaction, or it might even frustrate you to the point that, which is what happens to me, as I'll get a message saying, hey, how come mine's not looking like this? I've done everything right. And that's the next source of advice I can give you, is stick to your plan. Seriously, stick to your plan. So that plan that you've got for your bonsai that I've talked about 350 million times now on the podcast, it's got to have come from a reliable source, and it's got to have come from you having a greater understanding of what's going to happen and how long things are going to take. That comes from learnings, from seeking advice, from being involved in courses and that sort of thing, and asking the right people the right questions. Those sort of plans are realistic. So, let's say you've got a weak tree, you've just repotted it, and you just got the spring burst happening, everything's starting to grow. It's like, cool, I'd love to cut this thing because I get division on those buds, and then I can defoliate in a few months' time and I can push a second flush of growth. So yeah, great, I'm going to be sort of 2 steps ahead of where I would have been if I just left it alone. But what's the plan? What's the plan tell you for that tree? Okay, the plan is build the strength on the tree. Are you gonna build strength on the tree by constantly cutting it and then taking off its foliage? 100% you will not. So the plan is to build strength, because most often going slower will get you there quicker. Taking your time to build strength, to measure, to monitor, to focus on the root structure of the tree as opposed to the foliage structure, getting that part right always results in you achieving your goal quicker. So going slow for the next 6 months or 3 months or year or whatever the plan tells you.
We'll be right back.
Hey artists, ever feel like you're navigating your career alone? I'm Adam Botsford, and in my new podcast, That Wonderful State, I'm sharing an inside look at art and business. I'm also bringing in artists from all walks of life to share their stories, advice, and lessons learned. In these interviews, I ask artists ranging from published illustrators to gallery experts to share their know-how in direct layman terms. Whether you're just starting out or deep in the hustle, That Wonderful State is here to help you bypass the gatekeeping and get a look at things from the inside. So grab your coffee and a sketchbook, and let's figure this out together. Subscribe to That Wonderful State wherever you get your podcasts, and keep being amazing.
Or whatever that tree's telling you that they need, by doing that now means that next year you can push it harder, and the year after you'll be able to push it even harder, which means that in sort of a 2 or 3 year period, you'll have easily hit the targets that you want to achieve. So while it might feel like a bit of a slow burn, there's going to be that exponential growth at the end of it where it's going to take off and you're going to get there a hell of a lot faster, which is the goal. All right. So patience is one of the things that makes bonsai brilliant. It can be frustrating, I agree, but learning patience at any point in your life and being able to stop and smell the roses and see things happen slowly is it's a beautiful thing. It's it's one of those things that comes to you, I suppose, after experience, that knowing by pushing that envelope a little bit harder now means that you're going to be set back for years. That in 3 years' time, instead of being anywhere near your goal, you're going to feel like you're treading water. Like, this tree is not going to be getting healthier. It's not going to be getting stronger. It's just going to be doing the same thing. You're going to be getting dieback over the winter period. You're going to have a weak start to spring. The tree is going to constantly feel like it's going nowhere. You're going to be frustrated as hell. You're going to be saying, I've changed my mix. I'm using a really good soil mix now. I'm fertilizing really well. It's in a great position. I'm watering it like I should be. But you're not sticking to the plan. The plan is to build the strength of the tree, if it is. And if it's not, well, obviously just stick with the plan. If it's a 5-year target that you've got, don't try and achieve it in 1 year because you've seen some silly looking AI images on the web anywhere that's shown you something that's not realistic. And positioning of branches on trees, we can all hope for the best. We can pray to the bonsai gods and hope that buds pop at certain points, and look at pictures and go, well, how did they do that? And how has that grown there? Like, that doesn't make sense. How does one shaded branch continue to grow really strong when it's not getting any sunlight whatsoever? The cold hard facts are it won't. And that's what I mean. It's don't get led down the garden path by these fake images. Another piece of advice. So, seek advice, trust the source, seek the advice. Doesn't matter if they're 2 minutes down the road or they're the other side of the world. I'd still trust the source and reach out to people and try and get some guidance from those that have been there, that have done it, that will give you an honest appraisal of things and say, hey, really, you're looking at 5 years. If that's the case, then just lock it in, build the 5-year plan and stick with it. The other thing I'd say would be go to bonsai shows. Often, you want to see the best bonsai that you can that are within, your local area. Go to a local bonsai show. Traveling around the world to go and see bonsai shows in, Europe or Japan, brilliant, fantastic. Do it. Absolutely, it's on the bucket list. You must get over and see the trees in other continents. But for your trees, for your experience, for your climate, for everything that works around you right here and right now, go to your local shows. There's no point living in the tropics and traveling to Japan in winter and looking at their trees going, okay, I want that. I want that one. That's exactly what I want. I want to grow my pine to look like that. Or I want to have the deciduous structure like that. Okay, well, you can't have deciduous. They're not going to grow like that. But it's lovely to see. It's beautiful to take photos of. It's memories that will last you a lifetime. But as far as setting your objectives and being realistic about what you're going to achieve within periods of time, go to local shows and seek out people. You'll see 1,000,001 people walking around with these Ask Me badges at bonsai shows. Ask them. And if you can, try and work your way back to the source of that tree and grab hold of them and say, how long? What did you do? Soil mix, fertilizing, tell me about your pruning. You might not get a hell of a lot of time with them. You may not even get to see them, but at least you can see what's realistically possible in the flesh. You're not going to be misguided by, a picture that is going to steer you the wrong way. Local shows are awesome, and the clubs and the people that put them on put so much work into them that they're visiting them from the point of view that you're getting that realistic view of what's achievable for you, specifically with trees in your local area. That's brilliant. The other thing I'd say is when I want to look, early days to see what would grow really well around my area, or what would be the best, or what could I achieve. One of the best sources for me before I built up my bonsai network of people that I knew and that source of information that I could reach out to and ask, before I got to that point when I was not a member of a bonsai club and I was still hunting around and I was reading books and magazines and all that sort of stuff, one of the best sources for trying to build your plans and get realistic information is bonsai nurseries, and they definitely deserve our patronage. There's so many different ways now to acquire trees that possibly nurseries are somewhere down the line now, where they used to be number one for everything. Now they're somewhere down the path a little bit, I suppose, in certain places, possibly, maybe, don't know. I still reckon that they are definitely somewhere that we should be spending our time and spending our money and making sure that we support them. If they disappear from the framework for whatever reason, it's not going to be good for bonsai in your local area. You want as many bonsai nurseries around as you possibly can, so support them and have a look at the trees. And I tell you what, not all bonsai nurseries, but the vast majority of bonsai nurseries that I've ever come across are brilliant growers of trees. And while things change from a nursery environment, in my opinion, from a nursery environment to a personal bonsai collector's garden where we achieve things at, I don't mean this in a negative way, but we achieve things at a different level. So we can afford to spend, a decent amount of money repotting an individual tree. Whereas a bonsai nursery, if they did that for every single tree in their yard, then it would absolutely price them out of the market and you wouldn't be able to afford them. So things change when it goes from a nursery environment to an enthusiast environment, or it definitely should. So while the growth that they achieve, their job, as far as I'm concerned, for me, and this is my opinion, right? This is my podcast. This is what I believe. I believe nurseries are there to achieve, for me, of the 4 stages of production. Trunk and nabari being number 1. That's the nursery's job. You get me a really nice trunk and a really nice nabari, and I'll pay for that time. Hopefully, they can start moving into the primary branches. So the second stage of development, they can start moving into that area for me, and I can look at a tree and go, there are so many choices on this tree. And the branches are all down low, so I can then decide how I want this tree to look, and I can pick my primary branches around this thing. And then for me, it's take it home, start working on the root system, so then I can support my third stage, which is my secondary branches, and the final stage, which is my ramification, which needs a massive amount of fine roots. So visiting nurseries and having a look at how they grow their trees and seeing where they make their chops on trunks, or seeing how they've allowed something to grow and push branches, and what they've done, like have you ground grown these things, they're a fantastic source of reliable information where, let's say you want to grow a few things in your backyard and you want to put them into grow tubs or in the ground or whatever it is. Bonsai nurseries are the place to go and speak to and say, okay, so how do you go from that tiny little seed to this? How long did that take? Because coming to someone like me, I'm not a massive ground grower, or I don't put 1,000 seeds into dirt every year. I don't take 1,000,000 cuttings. I wouldn't come to me for a fantastic source of information on things like that. I would be going to the bonsai nursery saying, cool, how did you do it? What did you do after propagation? Like, once it got there, how long did it take? And just ask them a few questions. Spend money with them, by all means. Pay for the advice by taking home a new pot or some material or some tools or whatever it is that they've got there. But definitely seek the information from a reliable source. That's what I'm trying to say for this section of the podcast, is that it's easy to get fed rubbish from a very wide source of information, and I think it's just time to rein it back in a little bit, because it's been something I've focused on a lot over the last, I suppose, 6 months. When I look at things, I go, oh, that's rubbish. I've got to talk about that. Oh, look at that. That's a rubbish picture. And then the messages start coming through. Oh, what about this? And oh, look at that. I really want my tree to look like that. And it's like, okay, got to talk about it now. So just be mindful that more often than not, if you don't know where the photos are coming from, I can almost guarantee that they've been created by someone saying, hey, make me a beautiful picture of a Japanese maple in a Japanese garden setting its leaves early spring. Go. Oh, that's perfect. I'll upload that. Here's one of my trees from my collection. Yeah, no worries. So, also from an acquisition point of view, I'd be very mindful before you acquire any trees from images like that. Well, thanks for tuning in, you bonsai fanatics. So just fun wrap up. Just trust the source. That's as pure and simple as it gets, and reach out for help. That's a very common thread on this podcast, is that reaching out part, but also to stick with the plan. It's an awesome time of the year. It's a turbulent time for weather around the place. There's cold snaps, there's strong winds, there's lots of sunshine. The days are getting longer. The trees are all waking up. There's definitely lots to do around the place, with keeping up with fertilizing. That's a massive thing at the moment for me, is that fertilizing within the strategy for developing each of my individual trees, making sure that I get them as strong as I possibly can, harnessing spring's resources. Talked about that too plenty of times. So make sure that if you are going to cut something, it definitely fits with your plan. And if you're not cutting something, again, likewise, that it fits with your plan. Keep in mind, the longer something gets, the thicker it gets. The thicker it gets, the coarser it becomes. Depending on the species, the internode length can start to jump out as well. We can start to ruin structure by doing nothing. But we get to build strength and root structure on our trees too, by allowing things to grow and to extend and to develop. So just make sure that you're constantly looking at your trees, you're thinking about your plan. It's a really important time of the year that you don't want to miss the boat. You don't want to stuff it up, because it's a long time before spring gets back here again. And enjoy it. Take the time walking around the yard. I love it. I love being able to walk through, freshly mown lawns. Flowers are bursting. I've got little baby birds chirping up in trees with nests. It's a really nice time of year, so make the most of it. Anyway, so next podcast, I'm going to start talking about sizing of bonsai and what my preferences are, because this sort of stemmed from someone coming around the yard looking at my trees going, "Oh, I thought you only had big trees." But anyway, that's for the next podcast. So thank you very much for sticking around. Thanks for listening. Thanks to the subscribers too. I love you dearly. Thank you very much for the support. And as always, until next time, happy bonsai.